Hi there. The attempted assassination of Venezuela's president by drone gave us just one glimpse of a turbulent political landscape in Latin America. Nicaragua continues to be volatile, and in 2018, 6 Latin American countries will elect new presidents. What will be the impact on China's ties with these nations? How will Chinese investors in the region look after their own interests? And how can China improve its influences in Latin America while competing with the U.S. in the larger picture of a trade war? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Professor Jiang Shixue, Director of the Center for Latin American Studies at Shanghai University, and by independent researcher Wang Weijun. We shall also speak with journalist and author Max Blumenthal in Washington, and Charles Tang, chairman of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry based in Rio de Janeiro. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Hey, gentlemen, what do you think of the assassination attempt? Who was behind this first-class murder of President Maduro?
Well, Ray, I'm not surprised at all about the incident, especially considering the scenario, nowadays scenario in Venezuela. I think the opposition could be do anything, but since there is no evidence, concrete evidence, I'm not going to charge anyone, and I don't think anyone could give a concrete charge to any party.
But Maduro said that's Colombia. Colombia is behind the scene.
Well, we have a lot of conspiracy theories concerning who are the big perpetrators behind the assassination attempt. But why do you think Mr. Wang says he is not surprised by anything that opposition forces could do?
Well, Venezuela is now suffering from triple crisis. Politically speaking, the government and the opposition are fighting with each other for so many years. And in terms of the so-called economic crisis, well, terrible. Nothing to buy, the supermarkets are empty. Some of the people are just suffering from hunger. And many people are running out of Venezuela to Colombia, Brazil. And in the social field, well, crime rates are rising. So given these triple crises, well, anything can happen.
Shops run by ethnic Chinese in Venezuela also suffer from robberies, I was told.
Yes.
Such stories often took place. But why, given the adversity of the economic situation in Venezuela, why does President Maduro still enjoy the loyalty of the military?
I think we should observe this question from the different parts. The first, I think, the bottom class of the society still trust him, because the people, maybe they take Maduro as the only one who could be reliable for them. And another reason is that they believe Maduro have the political legacy from the
Hugo Chavez.
But we have to remember that in 2002, Chavez was driven out of his presidential palace by some junior officers. But now, well, we see that Maduro has tough control of the military. So I don't believe that there should be military coup at all.
Let me cross over to Max for his comments on the latest. Hello, Max. What do you make of the latest dramatic development concerning the assassination itself? Do you think the United States was behind the assassination?
Well, we don't see any clear evidence from the U.S. However, we have heard from Jaime Bailey, who is an extremely popular right-wing Latin American talk show host, that he received advance notice of an assassination attempt on Maduro after attending a meeting in Miami. Many of the plots against leftist Latin American governments have emanated from Miami, from the Miami lobby. And we've also seen Maduro actually deliver a televised presentation presenting evidence, including taped confessions of a plot by former Venezuelan police officers based in Colombia who were working with the government of the outgoing President Santos. So if those confessions and the wiretaps that he produced are true, then there does seem to be a Colombian role, and as we know, Colombia is the United States' bulwark in Latin America against Venezuela. Colombia has also been destabilizing Venezuela through economic measures. Many of the Venezuelan oligarchs who are opposed to Maduro's rule have been taking their companies to Colombia and sort of undermining Venezuela's economy through the black market. We also saw a former Venezuelan police chief claim credit for a role in the assassination attempt. So there is a lot of evidence, actually, there's a preponderance of evidence that this plot did emanate from Miami and Colombia, and that would suggest that behind it there is some U.S. role.
One small question for you, very quickly, Max. With the end of the Cold War, do you think the American government has decided to give up the attempt of assassination in under whatever circumstances? I mean, assassination was used during the Cold War.
Yeah, I actually encountered a figure at an event in Washington yesterday, Roger Noriega, who was in charge of Latin American policy under George W. Bush. And this is someone who admitted, after he left the Bush administration, to having been involved in plans to destabilize Cuba. He said, chaos is the friend, and we tried to use chaos to break U.S.-Cuban relations. So what we're seeing now, and what we saw in Nicaragua, where the kind of color revolution model was put in play. Popular protest was stirred up along with armed elements put into the street. We see kind of a more sophisticated model than just simply the old classic Chile-style palace coup or assassination attempt, but these are coups nonetheless.
But what do you think of any therapy to the economic chaos in Venezuela?
Well, you know, the United States is going to, under Donald Trump, focus more on Latin America than I think we saw during the Bush administration when the U.S. had pivoted its foreign policy towards the Middle East. And this is very bad news for a place like Venezuela. The sanctions are cutting hard and they're cutting deep. The sanctions on Venezuela are the worst that any country has suffered in recent times, and they're making it very difficult for Venezuela to recover. They're targeting its oil sector, which has been the basis for its economy, and Maduro has said that he's going to try to diversify the economy and as well as diversify its international partnerships. China is obviously key in that, along with Russia and Iran is about to experience biting sanctions from the Trump administration.
Given the historical low of the favorability rating of the Trump administration in Latin America, what do you think of the general relationship between Washington and Organization of Americas?
Well, I really don't know if Trump or any, if Trump colors the relationship with the OAS. I mean, the OAS is a traditional American tool for exerting its influence in Latin America. It was founded during the Cold War for fighting anti-communism, and now it's playing a renewed role. I spoke to Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega about the OAS, and he said that there was a time recently when the left-wing leaders of Latin America, himself, Maduro before that, Chavez, the Kirchners, Lula in Brazil, controlled the OAS, and he said we didn't gang up on the U.S.-backed countries. But now that the U.S.-backed governments are in the majority, these are what he called right-wing governments, they're ganging up on him, passing condemnations of him by large measures, as well as Venezuela. And I can tell you from being in Washington, almost every week the OAS holds some kind of symposium or session to condemn Venezuela while completely ignoring all of the human rights crimes that are committed in U.S. allies like Mexico or Colombia.
Thank you so much, Max, for being with us. Charles, you're from Brazil, but have you followed very closely the situation in Venezuela? What do you make of the assassination attempt?
Well, I think that Maduro has a lot of different sections of people who would prefer to see him gone. Not only the U.S. and the CIA, as Max said, but also, you know, there has been revolts within the Venezuelan military. The massive, you know, expulsion of all the top leaders, business leaders from Venezuela because of his populist policies has also created a lot of people from the, you know, economic elite that would like to see him go. And all these massive migrations of people being, you know, humiliated and having to run away to Colombia and Venezuela in order to be able to eat is also creating, of course, a lot of animosity towards his policies. And it's amazing how the richest country of Latin America has been transformed into a beggar nation in a few years.
What's going to happen to
massive help, economic help?
Charles, what's going to happen to your country
by China
prior to the presidential election?
Yeah, well, in Brazil, of course, we went through a very, you know, a populist government, you know, that under President Dilma that really damaged the Brazilian economy a lot. President Temer tried to adopt some policies like reforming, lowering the Brazil costs by reforming the labor laws and fiscal and Social Security, but he was unable because of the, let's say, criminal corruption scandals to complete his reforms. And now we have a salad of about 7 different candidates. You know, Enrique Meirelles, who was a former president, my successor at the Bank of Boston, and former president, worldwide president for the Bank of Boston, and finance minister under Temer, is a candidate. And I think that he would be probably one of the good choices that Brazil could make. Another very brilliant economist, Paulo Rabelo de Castro, is vice president candidate under Álvaro Dias, which is also a serious candidate. And then we have the right wing, you know, they call him the Brazilian Donald Trump, the military captain, Bolsonaro, and the PT Lula still trying to be a candidate from his jail cell. And
thank you very much, Charles. I'll go back to you for more of your comments on relationship between Latin America and China. Now, former U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says that China would only bring Latin America short-term benefits. And he was promoting, of course, the American national interests in this continent about governance and development. Does that thinking continue following his departure from the office?
I think Tillerson is a vivid example of the overthinking. You know, this Cold War overthinking. I don't know by what means he said short-term benefits to Latin America, but as far as I know, the Chinese now are investing in Brazil or in many countries in infrastructure and also in the energy network. I think this will be a quite long-term benefit to the region.
This year will be an election year for Latin America. 6 countries will produce new faces in the presidential office. So what do you make of the volatility concerning our business stakes in these countries? Given the example in Venezuela, we spend $60 billion in the hope of having their oil. It's a kind of barter trade, but it seems things will evaporate. I mean, we will have nothing in return.
Well,
are you optimistic or the other way around?
Well, I would say that the bilateral ties between our 2 sides has been greatly institutionalized. So no matter who will come to power on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, this kind of bilateral relationship between China and Latin America will not be changed. The road is moving forward. Okay. Now, regarding your question about Chinese investment in Venezuela, well, I don't believe that Chinese companies have suffered a lot. No, not really. As far as I know, Chinese companies have made some profits. We can say, otherwise China can make bigger profits.
China could have made bigger
yes,
profits were it not for the chaos in
yes,
Venezuela.
result is this kind of crisis. But the so-called debt for oil, it's a kind of a very nice cooperation program. So China can get some profits from this kind of a debt for oil.
But what do you think of the liability of Chinese investment in a democratic country where electoral politics would often create more risks than deliver nice products?
Right. Nowadays, there is a very it's a very important factor that we should observe. Nowadays in China, China's investment in Latin America have very heavy investments, mainly by the SOEs, and in the energy or the mine sectors. Mainly, usually all these investments has a very strong guarantee, and some people even recite the factors of the Brazilian corruption factors to criticize the Chinese investment there. But actually, maybe the people, they confuse something, because the agreement between Chinese government, Chinese companies and Brazilian companies are considered cooperative.
Win-win.
No, win-win is not, but it not depends on the certain people, certain persons' legal situation. It means the legal situation of some executives do not exclude the liability of the Brazilian, because the commitment is between the companies.
And do you think our business presence and business communities in Latin America have met kind of well, media scrutiny is one thing, but opposition or troubles from the United States might be the other, given the traditional way of thinking, like moral doctrine. Do you think the United States is still concerned with the growing influence of what they call communist regime from the PRC?
I still remember that about many years ago, well, more than 10 years ago, there was one American scholar who wrote an article, said, look at China's presence in South America or Central America and the Caribbean. President Monroe will roll over in his coffin. Okay, but then John Kerry, okay, several years ago, John Kerry, the former
Vice President,
the former Secretary of State of the U.S.
Secretary of State.
John Kerry said, Monroe Doctrine is over, but who knows? Tillerson said the Monroe Doctrine is still relevant, so who knows? All kinds of changes in the U.S. Now, I would say the U.S. is really an important factor in terms of China's relationship with many parts of the world. Okay, so wherever there is China and Africa, China, South America, well, the U.S. factor is always there. But I would say the U.S. does not need to have any concern about China's relationship with Latin America. China's relationship with the region is good for the region, more prosperity, and more prosperity means there will be less illegal migration to the U.S., less illegal drug trafficking to the U.S. So I would say this is good also for the U.S.
What do you think of the U.S. influence on the Panama Canal? Don't forget President Bush, the senior, ordered the invasion of this small country, and American troops captured former President Noriega, and he was brought to justice on charges of drug trafficking. Well, having said this, what do you think of our relationship with this country, which normalized its ties with the PRC last year? I interviewed the first ambassador of Panama in Beijing, but it seems they are very ambitious about attracting a maximum number of Chinese enterprises and investment so that Panama will be a place of convergence of Chinese enterprises. What do you make of the prospects?
Well, 100 years ago, the U.S. influence in Panama was enormous. And the
was
U.S.
enormous.
Enormous, great. And as a U.S. dollar,
Overall, I should say.
the U.S. dollar is still the legal tender for Panama, okay? But now, 100 years later, Panama has realized China is also China can also be a very important partner for this tiny Central American country, okay? So China can make some kind of contributions to the economic development of this very small country in Central America. So I believe that now we are going to realize that there will be the so-called Belt Road. I would say Panama can play a very important role in this regard, in terms of trade, investment, all kinds of things.
Let me go back to Charles. What's the chance for more of the Caribbean countries that maintain official ties with Taiwan to break ties and to follow the example of Panama and Dominique and normalize their relationship with the PRC? Because Madame Tsai Ing-wen, leader of Taiwan, still refused to accept the 1992 principle of one China. Therefore, in theory, there is the chance that more would, due to the domino effect, more would follow the suit of Panama and Dominique. What do you make of this chance?
Well, a few years ago, I wrote an article for the World Policy Institute of New York, which basically alluded to the fact that Latin America and Caribbean are growing a Chinese garden. And it's very simple, and the reasons are very easy to understand. You know, China has developed a new system of international relations. Since the beginning of history, strong nations dominated as weaker nations through the force of arms. Under the Monroe Doctrine, carry a big stick, you know, and a lot of dictatorships were installed during the Cold War in Latin America. So China, however, has a win-win policy, and it doesn't interfere with the internal affairs of countries. And the Chinese relationship with Latin America, in fact with Africa and the world, has been a very healthy one, in the sense that China helps promote development. Instead of sending its Marines, China sends its business people, its executives, to trade and to invest, and it brings development and prosperity to the host countries. China has invested over $100 billion into Brazil, and a lot of these investments are doing quite well because previous to the car wash corruption scandal, foreign companies did not have an opportunity to enter into the large infrastructures of this huge country. Because of the corruption case, most of these companies ran into difficulties, and so the field was open to foreign investments, and the prices, because of the crisis, were very attractive. Now, countries like Panama, Dominican Republic, and other countries in the Caribbean and in Latin America realize that in order for them to develop and in order for them to prosper, they need to have relations with China, because China does invest. You know, in the last few governments, the U.S. governments have sort of abandoned Latin America because they were too busy in the Middle East, you know, dancing around China and so on. So, however, China has made great penetrations in terms of investment. You know, mutual interests builds much stronger alliances.
Thank you so much. We appreciate
the power of a rifle.
We appreciate your very clear articulation of the views our general relationship, and particularly Panama. Since the 18th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, the government grip on ideology has been tightened significantly. It's an obvious hallmark of domestic politics. Ideology is featured more prominently than before. Question is whether ideology spills over into our foreign policy domain. Taking Latin America as an example, we have the left-leaning forces in many countries, Venezuela, Cuba, even Brazil. So what do you think of the Chinese ideology or ideological influence in that continent?
No. I would say ideology is not playing an important role in terms of China's relationship with the region. Well, you know, the Communist Party of China has established working relationship with almost all the political parties in the region, no matter these parties are left or right. Secondly, China has good relationship with any country in the region, no matter this is a good friend to the U.S. or an enemy to the U.S. So I would say just pragmatic.
I have some to add, because the ideology in the Chinese diplomatic relations and the foreign policies has a very least weight, especially in the Latin America, in the Chinese relationship with Latin America. We remember that when Chile has when Pinochet,
Augusto Pinochet, the former dictator of that country.
Yes. In 1973, China was the only socialist country that did not broke the relationship with Chile. It means
so
that
our foreign policy was very practical, had been very practical, and will be practical.
Yes, because
regardless
China,
of the ideology and political institutions of the host country. So, what do you think of the Belt and Road Initiative influence on the economic collaboration between the two sides?
Well, this Belt Road, of course, will offer a good opportunity for these two areas, China and South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. There will be more trade facilitation, more investment, more financial cooperation, and people-to-people exchanges. So we are going to see that this kind of relationship will be deepened and further and further. Now, China has signed agreement with Trinidad and Tobago in terms of implementing Belt Road. So we are going to see that there should be more opportunities between our two sides.
Another thing that I believe that one road, one belt is nowadays is a brand for the Chinese development overseas, because actually we know that one road, one belt is mainly is eastward from China point of view, but nowadays in Latin America, people even the Caribbean countries,
Central American countries,
they are adapting these brands to close the relationship with China. So I think it's
not long ago I went to Suriname. I don't know if you have ever been to Suriname. Suriname. Well, this is a tiny country in the corner of South America. People there, the business, these overseas Chinese, they are anxiously looking forward to participating in Belt Road. So you can imagine.
Everybody wants to jump the wagon.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, China faces a dynamic, very promising continent in Latin America, despite the negative impact of the trade war between Washington and Beijing. I will see you next time. Goodbye.